One of the hardest things in dating and relationships is when things end or when they fade and the other person never gives you the answers you want, especially if that person is avoidant. You find yourself thinking, if they would just explain, if they would just give me closure, then I could move on. But here's the truth, closure doesn't come from them. Closure is something you give yourself, because if you hand over the power of your healing to someone who has already shown they can't meet you emotionally, you'll be waiting forever. When someone pulls away from us, especially when they have an avoidant attachment style, our natural instinct is to go searching for answers. We think, if I could just get them to talk, if I could just get them to explain, then I'd finally feel peace. But the difficult and liberating truth is that their silence is already an answer. It may not be the answer we want, and it may not come wrapped in the neat words we crave, but it is communication all the same. When someone doesn't reach back, doesn't clarify, doesn't reassure, that lack of action is their message. Think about it. If someone wanted to stay, they would. If someone wanted to make things work, you would feel their effort. Avoidance doesn't come from confusion, it comes from a choice. It comes from a place of someone deciding, consciously or unconsciously, that they are not willing or not able to engage with you in the way you desire. And though it feels unfair that you don't get a monologue explaining every detail of why they're stepping back, the space they create by withdrawing is the clearest signal you'll ever need. So many of us torment ourselves with why. Why did they stop calling? Why didn't they follow through? Why did they seem interested one day and cold the next? But if you zoom out, you'll notice that none of these questions really serve you. The why often keeps you stuck in their world instead of yours. The deeper truth is that their silence and inconsistency already tell you they're not capable of meeting your needs. You don't need to know the inner workings of their mind. You don't need to collect more evidence. The absence of communication is evidence enough. In fact, when you wait for them to give you words of closure, you're actually giving them power over your healing. You're saying, I can't move forward until you tell me why. But here's the thing, you don't need their narrative. You already have all the data you need. They are not showing up. That's not ambiguity, that's clarity. It may not feel like clarity because it hurts, but hurt and clarity can live together. Silence is never neutral. It always communicates something. When someone avoids the conversation, avoids commitment, avoids even basic decency of explaining that avoidance is their answer, they are telling you, without words, that they cannot or will not give you what you're asking for. And when you begin to see their lack of action as loud communication, you stop chasing. You stop looking for a perfectly phrased message that will soothe the ache. You start to understand that the ache isn't because you don't have closure. It's because you don't want to accept the closure that's already there. The moment you embrace silence as an answer, you take back your emotional power. Instead of reading between the lines, you read the reality in front of you. And the reality is clear. Someone who cannot step towards you is by definition stepping away. Their silence doesn't need translation. It is the answer. Closure is so often misunderstood. We grow up thinking closure is something that comes from another person, like a gift they hand over when they decide the relationship is done. We imagine that if they would just sit down with us, explain everything, answer all of our questions, and give us some kind of validation, we would finally be able to breathe and move forward. But the reality is, closure has very little to do with them. Closure is not about what they say or don't say. It's about the decision you make for yourself. It's not about why they behaved a certain way. It's about how you choose to respond now. When you place closure in their hands, you set yourself up for disappointment. You give them power over your healing, power over your peace, and power over your timeline. And the truth is, the very person you're asking closure from is usually the least capable of giving it to you. If they were able to communicate clearly, consider your feelings, and provide reassurance, you probably wouldn't be here in the first place. So expecting them to suddenly give you the kind of kindness and clarity they didn't give during the relationship is like going back to an empty well hoping water will appear. It's exhausting and it keeps you waiting in the wrong place. Real closure begins when you stop asking, why did they do this to me? And start asking, what do I need now? That single shift changes everything. Instead of analyzing their motives, you put the focus back on yourself. Instead of replaying their behavior, you begin to think about your standards, your boundaries, and your vision for the future. You realize that closure isn't about understanding them, it's about understanding yourself more deeply. It's about taking the lessons from what happened and deciding how you want to show up differently moving forward. When you center closure around yourself, it becomes a form of self-respect. You begin to say, I don't need you to explain why you couldn't meet me where I am. I already know what I deserve, and I can see that this doesn't match it. That shift takes you out of a place of waiting and places you back in control. You're no longer chasing answers, you're creating them. You're no longer tied to their actions, you're tied to your decisions. It's easy to believe that closure is about getting their side of the story, but in reality, even if they gave you every explanation in the world, it wouldn't change the fact that the relationship didn't work. It wouldn't change the fact that you're still left with a choice to hold on or to move on. True closure comes the moment you choose yourself over the need to understand them. It's when you decide that your peace is too important to keep waiting for someone who couldn't or wouldn't give you what you needed when it mattered most. When someone withdraws or pulls away, it's so easy to take it as rejection. The mind rushes in with stories. I wasn't good enough. I must have done something wrong. If I had been different, maybe they would have stayed. That story becomes heavy and it keeps you locked in a cycle of self-blame. But here's the truth. What feels like rejection is often just revelation. It's not that you weren't worthy of love. It's that the other person showed you exactly what they could or couldn't give. And when you choose to see it that way, their behavior becomes less of a wound and more of a form of clarity. Reframing the story is one of the most powerful things you can do for your healing. Instead of interpreting their distance as proof of your inadequacy, you can look at it as proof of their limits. You can remind yourself that every action someone takes is information. If they disappear, that's information. If they avoid communication, that's information. If they refuse to engage with emotional depth, that's information. And when you view it as information rather than rejection, you move from a place of feeling powerless to a place of seeing reality clearly. This shift isn't about denying your feelings. It's natural to feel hurt when someone withdraws, especially if you care deeply about them. But reframing is about choosing what meaning you attach to that hurt. You can either say, they left because I wasn't enough. Or you can say, they left because they weren't capable of being present in the way I need. Both interpretations acknowledge the pain, but only one protects your self-worth. Only one keeps your value intact. The beauty of reframing is that it allows you to extract lessons instead of scars. If someone reveals through their actions that they cannot be consistent, instead of seeing that as a blow to your desirability, you can see it as an opportunity to be clearer about your standards in the future. You can say to yourself, I deserve someone who doesn't leave me guessing. I deserve someone who can show up fully. Their absence becomes less of a rejection and more of a filter that cleared space for someone better aligned with your needs. It's important to remember that not everyone who crosses your path is meant to stay. Some people appear in your life only to reveal something about what you don't want or what you refuse to settle for. That doesn't mean the connection was pointless. It means it served a different purpose. By reframing it as revelation, you give that experience meaning without giving it the power to define your worth. When you see rejection as revelation, you begin to appreciate the clarity that comes from someone showing their true colors. You no longer cling to the fantasy of who they could be because their actions have already revealed who they are. And once you accept that revelation, you can step forward knowing you're not losing something of value. You're gaining freedom to create space for what you truly deserve. When you've been involved with someone avoidant, it's easy to fall into the trap of trying to decode their behavior. You replay every text, every pause, every moment of affection, followed by withdrawal, trying to solve the puzzle of why they act the way they do. You convince yourself that if you could just understand them better, if you could crack the code, you would finally get the connection you long for. But the truth is, people who are avoidant are not puzzles waiting for you to piece them together. They're simply showing you who they are, someone who cannot or will not give the type of intimacy and consistency you're asking for. When you treat an avoidant person like a mystery, you place yourself in the exhausting role of detective. You start analyzing their childhood, their traumas, their attachment wounds, hoping that if you can just empathize enough, you can unlock their heart. But empathy alone doesn't build a relationship. You can understand someone's pain without needing to remain in a dynamic that keeps wounding you. Their distance isn't a riddle to solve, it's a limitation to accept. This is where so many people get stuck. They confuse understanding with progress. They think, if I can just figure out why they're avoidant, maybe I can love them enough to heal it. But healing isn't something you can do on someone else's behalf. Change has to be chosen by them, not forced or coaxed out of them. Until they decide to face their own patterns, you will continue to run in circles, mistaking breadcrumbs of affection for hope. What's liberating is realizing that you don't need to decode anything. Their inconsistency, their withdrawal, their reluctance to connect deeply, those are the answers. Instead of asking, why do they keep doing this? The more empowering question becomes, why am I staying in a situation that doesn't give me what I need? That shift puts the power back in your hands. Suddenly, the focus is no longer on solving them, but on choosing you. When you let go of the idea that avoidant people are puzzles, you stop carrying the burden of their growth on your shoulders. You stop waiting for their behavior to change as proof of your worth. Instead, you see their avoidance for what it is, a sign that they're not ready or willing to meet you at the level you deserve. And when you stop overthinking their motives, you make space for clarity. You begin to understand that someone doesn't need to be a villain for you to walk away. They can be someone with their own struggles, their own reasons, their own fears, and still not be the right partner for you. Avoidants aren't puzzles, they're people with patterns. And those patterns either align with your needs or they don't. When you accept that simple truth, you release yourself from the endless loop of analysis. You no longer waste energy looking for hidden meanings in their silence. You recognize that their inability to show up consistently is all the information you need to decide your next step. And that realization frees you from trying to solve what was never yours to solve in the first place. Closure often feels like something we're waiting to receive, as if one day the other person will appear, hand us the perfect explanation, and then we'll finally feel free. But the real power comes when you realize closure isn't given, it's created. It's not about them writing the last page of the story, it's about you deciding the book is finished. When you choose to close the chapter yourself, you no longer have to wait for words, apologies, or clarity that may never come. You reclaim authorship over your own life. This kind of closure doesn't mean you don't care. And it doesn't mean the pain suddenly disappears. What it means is that you've decided not to keep feeding that pain by leaving the door open. Every time you check your phone, reread old messages, or hope for their return, you keep the story alive. Choosing closure is about saying to yourself, this may hurt, but I won't keep fueling it. I deserve to move forward. That choice is powerful because it reminds you that healing isn't something that happens to you passively. It's something you participate in actively. There's a certain dignity in deciding for yourself that something is over. You stop needing them to validate your feelings or explain their behavior because your own decision is enough. You become the authority on what you will and won't tolerate, and that authority is far more reliable than any explanation they could give you. You don't need to hear "it's over" from them to know that it's over. Their actions have already spoken, and now your choice seals it. What makes this difficult is the part of us that still longs for resolution. We think if we close the chapter ourselves, we're somehow missing out on answers that could bring peace. But peace doesn't come from knowing every detail. It comes from deciding you no longer need every detail in order to move on. You can let go without understanding everything, because closure isn't about perfect understanding, it's about acceptance. When you create closure, you're not erasing the past, you're acknowledging it and then choosing to move beyond it. You're saying, this mattered, I felt deeply, but I will not let this define the rest of my story. And in doing so, you give yourself the permission to open space for something better. You stop waiting for them to unlock the door and you start walking yourself out of the room. The most empowering moment comes when you realize that closure is less about endings and more about beginnings. It's not only about closing a chapter, it's about beginning a new one written on your terms. And when you give yourself that gift, you're no longer a character waiting for someone else to finish the story. You're the author, and you get to decide when it's time to turn the page. So if there's one thing to remember, it's this: closure is not a gift someone else gives you, it's a choice you make for yourself. You don't need the avoidant person to explain, to apologize, or to make sense of what happened. Their silence is an answer. Their limits are a revelation. And when you stop trying to solve them, you discover that the power to end the story and begin a new one has been in your hands all along. Closure is freedom, and it begins the moment you decide to stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to heal. That is your decision, your strength, and your next chapter. Thank you so much for being here, for opening your heart to this message, and for reminding yourself of the love and respect you deserve. Take this with you, live it, and never forget, you are always the one who gets to decide when it's time to turn the page. Thank you, and goodbye.